Well, my friend,
Yep.
cut or uncut?
I mean, in terms of journalistic interviews, I really prefer an unedited format. As to my own genitalia, I am cut. Uh, but I'm pretty sure, I think. Well, actually, maybe my youngest brother. The two brothers I grew up with, mine was the only penis that looks this particular way. And I don't mean mutilated like some sort of monstrous ogre. It's just a regular looking, like, I don't know, barely attractive penis. But uh, it's I'm the only circumcised one. Both of my two younger brothers I grew up with were not circumcised. So I grew up in a household, I think, that generally disfavored circumcision, and yet I am circumcised. And I'm kind of just assuming my youngest brother is, but we were very different in age by like whatever, he's 27. So we're like almost 20 years or 15 plus years difference. So I've never seen his penis. Um, but his mom is at least Jewish by culture. So then I sort of just assume that that would like accelerate the likelihood or sorry, increase the likelihood of him getting the choppy choppy. What
Yeah,
about you, kid?
I
Cut or
am
uncut?
I am also cut, aka circumcised, as is every man in my immediate family. And I think, well, two things to start off. You said not a, I think, monstrous mutilation. But one thing that's on my mind is I do consider it a form of genital mutilation, one that we're really quite casual about,
Yeah.
especially performed at a young age. Um, I've also heard that one of the justifications is basically just something like a father saying, "I guess he should look like I look."
Yeah, I've seen that. I've heard that a lot. I should say I've read that a lot online as a popular justification. It's just have his penis looks like his father's. And whenever someone says that, I'm always like, wait, what now? Say that again. Out of context, that just sounds real weird, just so you know.
So, one of the reasons this came up lately was I am working my way through a book called The Myth of Normal by Gabor Mate, Dr. Gabor Mate, and his son, Dr. Daniel Mate. And
Oh, they're
there's,
both doctors. I didn't know that. That's an educated family.
you know what? I thought they were both doctors,
They
but
may well be. I don't know enough about I drink used to drink when I could have caffeine. I drink yerba mate, but that's you know far more about the family than I do.
well, I want to strike that from the record because I'm
Oh,
looking
okay.
at the cover of the book and it's Gabor Mate MD with Daniel Mate.
Oh,
Uh,
okay.
it's slightly confusing in the narrative though because it's often referring to like the first person, and I think that's always Gabor
Oh,
Mate.
yeah. Oh, interesting. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I may have gotten confused and thought I thought his son was a doctor too,
Yeah.
but
I just think it's cool they're working together and writing this sort of book together. I
I
know it's
agree.
a sidetrack. I just think it's a very cute. I think
I
it's cute.
super agree. Let's leave it at
Yeah.
that. So here's a quote,
Yeah.
and this is the context here is this is a chapter about, I mean, the whole book is about trauma, illness, and healing in a toxic culture. And this chapter in particular is about babies and what babies need
Mm,
for healthy development.
yeah.
When she mentioned circumcision. I used to perform this procedure myself, one that in the North American context has no health benefit and has been shown to cause suffering to the child, especially in the medical form I was trained in.
So,
Mm.
survey size of one doctor
Yeah.
says there's no medical benefit, no health benefit. And I think that's the question we're holding.
Hmm.
But that we've both uh, undergone this procedure, obviously without agency, um,
Hmm.
not to cast blame on those who made such decisions in the late 70s. But this question I'm holding I think especially because it's casual. I mean, I think
Mhm.
that's a theme I think we address here is
Yeah.
certainly around harm and harm reduction,
Yes.
and particularly which things people seem to just grab onto as like hardcore issues that they would seem
Yeah.
to die for, and which just seem to be awfully casual. So in another context, if we talk about genital mutilation, probably, particularly with infant girls in some regions, I think that's often seen. People are aghast, that we would do
Yeah.
such things.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah. And I think that's one of the terms, and I'm not opposed to your use of the term. I probably would be, and I was like, well, I think it's kind of like using insurrection for January 6th. It's technically accurate. I don't know if I think it takes a conversation to guide people into both things being included in the framework. Genital mutilation, that is, by the way, the phrase, because we have that context. I don't know, but for whatever reason, I feel like it was a real big deal for 46 years where people in the US were really concerned about genital mutilation in other cultures across the planet. I don't know who started that particular trend. I found it also concerning. I think the primary difference that people would say is, well, this would almost be like removing, well, who knows, maybe it's the opposite. If you remove like the clitoral hood, but not the clitoris itself, in which case you're actually kind of exposing the pleasure, the erogenous zone. Whereas I think a lot of genital mutilations that people were getting upset about in the, what was that, the like 90s, 2000s? I don't know, for whatever reason. Short amount of time, people really cared about that stuff. And then in that case, there was like clitoral removal, meaning you're actually like removing like uh, the most profound sensory organ in that region for the average human female, meaning you've then deprived that person of like just a primary source of pleasure around the sexual act. And my firm belief, and I would even say knowledge, is that the sexual act is designed to be pleasurable. That is an inherent element of its design. But even though it's lesser, I think you absolutely could still place it on the same spectrum. Meaning, uh, I think part of the circumcision intention is to reduce sexual sensitivity. At least
yeah,
that seems, it's subjectively or anecdotally, or even in whatever things I've read about it, people are saying that is one of the outcomes. Now, some people say, oh, that's a good thing in terms of sexual, like stamina and sexual performance. Um, but, and perhaps also um, reducing, what is it? The sort of, what's the monomaniacal, uh, I would even say epoch era of mankind, specifically men in mankind, male mankind, um, sexual desire, pleasure kind of takes over the male mind and female mind too, but takes over the male mind. I would say to a slightly altered degree because our just by pure pragmatism, our genitalia is on the outside, and so uh, incidental contact, rubbing, etc., uh, can cause a sexual arousal response. I think much more easy. Hopefully, that's non-controversial. Again, men and women are, yes, both sexual creatures, both flush with desire. Puberty affects men and women in very similar ways in a lot of ways. However, just the fact that it's like on the outside, it can bump into things means arousal happens, I would say, much more easily for men, and that extends decades afterwards. So in some way, reducing sensitivity of that area seems to be at least partially a design as a technique of suppression of pleasure, or I would even say a suppression of hedonism, as it's assuming a good faith. The bad faith would be like they want us to experience less pleasure. I don't know how that plays out statistically in terms of like the sexual activity of circumcised and uncircumcised people. That would probably filter through cultural norms more than anything physical. But you are at least, I feel like that is that not having inhabited a body that wasn't circumcised. I don't, of course, know experientially, but that does seem to be a popular claim. Um, that
yeah, and it
reduced
would seem
sensitivity is,
especially
yeah, we've been marked to a less sensitive sexual experience for the rest of our lives by a decision made in maybe not in haste, but made casually and conducted in very short order.
Yeah, that would seem especially true with the clitoris, because as far as
Yes.
we can tell, it is an organ purely devoted to pleasure.
Yeah.
Obviously, the penis multitasks.
Yes. Yeah.
And
Take that. Take that, superior sexual organ.
it's a
I think
remarkable
that
design.
I think the
Sometimes I'm
female
just
sexual
like,
organ is I think
wow,
the female sexual organ is superior to the male. A, just because of its sexual versatility uh, alone, and I would say aesthetically by the fact that it's just a more like obviously discreet one.
yeah. And I think, I don't know, it's funny with my stepdaughter being 9 and sort of terrified about the idea of having a period. I find myself
Oh yeah.
throughout many periods of my life, um, many moments of my life, being in some ways jealous. I mean, the ability to like incubate and deliver life, seems
Yeah.
quite profound.
Yes. I recognize it is an intense trade-off.
Yes, yes,
Intense trade-off in order to gain that that straight up miraculous ability. Um, but
but
just this is just shout out to the whole female genitalia in general. Like big ups, guys.
big ups. So I agree with you. What I've heard anecdotally and what seems to exist. I mean, part of the challenge here, I think, is there doesn't seem to be like really clear objective evidence of the pros and cons of circumcision.
Yeah.
That exactly why it's done. Of course, it is influenced by different cultures, religions,
Yeah.
family systems, values, all sorts of things. Um, there, there doesn't seem to be a strong medical reason for it. In
Hmm.
fact, in
Yep.
a brief bit of research for an article at the Mayo Clinic that says, it's sort of following up on some of the perceived benefits, and then it says still the risks of not being circumcised are rare, and the risks can also be lowered with proper care of the penis. And that's one thing that's pointed out often is hygiene. Maybe hygiene is easier with circumcision. And that may have especially been true. Maybe that was
Yes.
part of the reason before we had, at
Yep.
least in areas where we have sewage and running water, thankfully, and showers, hygiene's become a bit easier in
Yes.
the modern age. But going back to what you were saying about being desensitized, I remember this is bringing up the conversation I had with a friend of mine years ago who was gay, and he just had this sadness when we were this came up somehow, and he
Oh.
he just was like, oh man, like, yes, you're desensitized, you're not receiving. And I think that's for at
Hmm.
least two reasons. One is there are actually nerves in the foreskin that are
Yeah.
removed. They're
Yeah.
nerve endings. There are a lot of nerve endings there that create pleasure. And when it's exposed, when the rest of the penis is exposed, it's constantly
Yeah.
being touched and stimulated.
Yeah.
And
It's
so,
a lifetime of friction. Yeah.
yeah, so that causes a desensitization as well. So you have to wonder, especially because I think what you were getting at with potentially like with female mutilation is, I think part of the reason for that, as horrific as it is in my worldview, is to reduce pleasure and is to
Yeah.
reduce sexual desire
Yeah.
as a super hardcore version of abstinence, I guess.
Yeah. Or like adultery, essentially like an adultery law, an adultery, which we used to have in this country, I think till like the 70s or 80s. Um, yeah. To prevent promiscuity. Fornication was illegal here.
Yeah,
Not so much I think maybe even some states in our lifetime, but previous to our lifetime for a long period of time though. Adultery was like full on. I mean, I don't know if it's a bad. I don't. I'm again talking about worldviews or whatever. I don't know if it's a good idea or a bad idea, but like adultery was a crime, like not only just like frowned upon, but literally like you could face a criminal sentence, which is fascinating to think about from the modern perspective. But at the same time, I think it's doing some of the same work I think it's just very weird. What it constantly gets weird about is doing that work on a newborn baby.
Yes. Yes.
As
So
opposed to circumcising a 20-year-old, you know.
right. Hey, now you're old enough to decide.
Yeah.
And so we were speculating a little, like this whole umbrella of taming,
Yep.
taming humanity, taming
Yeah.
people for various reasons. And I don't think we have anything close to evidence to support this, but a question I'm holding is we do know statistically men are more violent, and
Mhm.
I'm curious. And again, I'm not like married to the term mutilation, and maybe I'm using that to
Yeah.
be a little sensational. We're in
Yeah.
sensational times, folks.
Yeah.
And
Or
yet,
lack of sensational times.
boom.
Hey.
And yet, I'm holding this question, is there any correlation whatsoever between what we're doing to infant boys and the violence that emerges later?
Mhm.
I'm very, very curious about.
That is curious. I mean, that is fascinating. I mean, you could almost do like a very confounded social science study on that, probably with relative ease, looking at like populations, percentage of circumcision in certain populations, either ethnically or nationally, and then looking at violence rates, rape rates, murder rates, etc., in said countries. It would be, I mean, it'd be confounded by whatever, probably 6 or 7 major other motivations um, or influences. But you could probably get at least a rough idea, like, oh, whether like the tenability of that theory. Whereas it's interesting because you can almost think of either it introduces the idea of um, what is it, imposed pain, violence, essentially, introduces the concept of violence very early to males, um, which can either be an intention of here's what can happen to you. So here's here's a boundary, here's a bulwark against your imposing on other people, or it introduces that idea, kind of creating a um what is it word, like a yeah, like in some ways almost a minor trauma point, because I can't look at all pain as as trauma necessarily. I think some pain leads to trauma and some pain does not, just depending on the how or why or the psychological circumstances you exist in. But introducing the idea of like power, someone can have such power of you to do such a thing, therefore your desire is to uh, kind of overcome or remedy that by occupying that power space yourself, meaning you can cause pain, and therefore you now have kind of completed the circle on feeling victimized, you know.
Yeah, a very
Like,
reasonable theory.
yeah, because we see that obviously with sexual abuse, that like sexual abuse in youth does produce a higher, again, I don't have the study to reference, but I've read them before, it produces a higher predilection towards sexual abuse. That the whole repeating the cycle thing does have an evidentiary basis. Um, which again, it just makes sense psychologically, even more than, yes, you're just putting those patterns in. I guess the question is, and this is one of the reasons probably people didn't think about it at all previous to recently, is that the accepted consensus, meaning not consensus of evidence, but consensus of expertise in regards to newborn pain, fetal pain, that whole world. Basically, people thought babies in the womb didn't feel anything. We've shown that to be inaccurate. Um, People thought newborns didn't feel anything. They had really like little to no sensation up till like 6 months or whatever. So most medical practices, even just like medical training, was built around really a general lack of concern uh for comfort in the true sense, or like avoiding pain responses, because you were like, no, they're just kind of flipping out because this is unusual. These are new sensations, and babies cry about whatever, and they're crying for who knows what reason. But now, through the development of more and more like comprehensive abilities to observe neurological processes, um, we know that newborns experience pain. So those kids are screaming, not just out of like, oh my gosh, what's happening? There was some cold sensation on my penis. Um, it's more like, oh no, that hurts.
And so to name it, the official question for today is not cut or uncut. It's should we circumcise our male babies.
Yeah.
Our questions always have to be a binary answer of yes or no. And that's how we oversimplify the world and find all the answers together.
Yeah. To at least give us a all it does is vaguely illuminate a tendency, folks. Yeah, well, that's it. That's fascinating.
So this is a question, why do we do it? I mean,
Yeah.
I would think one thing we could clearly agree on is it's unnatural to cut part of the body off. So, I don't know, maybe some disagree. Maybe maybe their cultural values sort of overcome that. But it seems to me like the whole my definition of nature is like leave it alone, like leave nature to be nature.
Yeah.
Now, a theme that comes up on the show a lot, including I think the reason we even got together in the first place, is the idea that I think one thing, one commonality you and I have is that we think in many cases we need a much better reason to intervene. I mean, that seems
Yes.
like a theme you were holding throughout COVID, and all these interventions that were just like, what the hell?
Just doing it. We got to do something.
And that's my view here. You know, it's just like, this seems to, whether we call it mutilation or not, the idea of cutting off part of the body, especially such a sensitive part at such a vulnerable age, seems to warrant a bit more reason and justification.
Yeah. I think, well, this is the funny thing. I think over time, I think it's very important for us to discuss this as though it is controversial. I sincerely believe it was intended to be controversial. It's not a small deal. I mean, at least through I would say in the West generally, certainly in my lineage, it owes influence by the Judaic tradition of slicing off foreskins of males. It was marking a very small group of people as unusual to everyone around them, meaning in some cases just as a simple means of tribal marking, almost the same way like some baby might be born, and some tribes they might stab them in both of the cheeks, right? And you create a little scarification, so you always know whenever anyone finds that baby anywhere, that baby is one of ours. That's in our tribe. So it's a form of that, but even more so, it's on the flipping, it's your penis, right? And it is, at least for males. Again, this may get into like deep feminist, whatever psychological theory or whatever. But it's your penis. It's the man's first toy. It is very much we have an external organ that extends out into the world. It is pleasure. It is also how we mark the world through urine or whatever. Especially if you consider when we lived outdoors much more often, it is a way of influence. It's also the way, and so therefore our expressions tend to be outward. I think it does factor in psychologically to why men behave the way they do, just the genitalia itself. And so it's marking this, tribally, it's a vulnerable exposure. It is and it shows a willing to sacrifice one's vulnerable self. But again, that would be more profound. It's profound in terms of like, these are the values of our tribe. It is slightly less profound in that when you mark a child as such, you've made that decision for them, as opposed to they like rumspringa it like Amish and then decide, yes, I want to come back and be Amish. Which is why, at least in my lifetime, I only know one person ever who in adulthood was heavily considering circumcision. Looked into it, like whether his insurance was going to cover it, all that sort of thing. I actually don't know if he ever went through with it. And then his was largely sort of an aesthetic thing. And I believe his either fiance or girlfriend or eventual wife or whatever was like a fan of doing it. But we do have to remember, to do it at first was highly unusual. It was unusual, and it was marking a people as distinct and chosen by God in the world. And that's certainly how it became casual. But then I think at some point it just became like an aesthetic maneuver in the West to sort of like to secular folks. So that's always the thing I've never understood, is like why a secular person like I, as a, like, at least my mom was a Christian when I was born. I was like, that's kind of at least sort of in the Judaic tradition. So it's kind of a nod to that past. The second thing, the reason they stopped doing it is I think my mom got older as a Christian. It was like, well, the Bible is very clear that like those who are the Lord's are those who are circumcised of heart, meaning they've sacrificed of pursuing their own intentions and pleasure, but instead pursue first and foremost the pleasure of the Lord, and secondly, the pleasure of their neighbor. So choosing God above all and others above themselves is absolutely what the marking that circumcision sort of echoes towards. So that's, that's kind of, I'm assuming, interlaced with why circumcision was prescribed for the Israelites. And I think that's why, although I never had a deep conversation with my family about it, like why they chopped them. They just were like, oh, well, it's not necessary because it's part of Judaic tradition and we're not Jewish.
Hmm.
So we don't need to be marked in that way.
Well, according to some extremely random result from a Google search, women's preferences generally favor the circumcised penis
Yeah.
for sexual activity, hygiene, and lower risk of infection. We have absolutely no, basis for that research, but there it is.
I've heard many people say that in terms of like an aesthetic thing, and I think so too. I just think the uncircumcised penis, having grown up around them, I've bathed them from an early. I bathed my little brother. I remember my mom used to. The doctors back then were even, I probably made more intense about it, especially with kids. They're like, you have to pull the foreskin back, and sometimes even like take a Q-tip and very gently kind of clean in there, especially when kids are constantly like crawling around, pooping in their diaper. You know what I mean? So like in that era when I would wash, I'm shouting out Will, when I would wash my brother Will's penis, uncircumcised penis, that was part of what was going on. I think once you're an adult, I really wouldn't, I would have to imagine, again, unless you're just like, you are straight up a bacterially overgrown person, that when, by the time one is into the realms of sexual congress, and had figured out the hormonal changes that induce just a particularly pungent era, then you figured out how to wash your own penis in a way that makes it clean. In which case, I'm assuming the disease spread is pretty minimal, if non-existent, statistically.
Yeah, maybe this is why this was up for me. Actually, we were babysitting for friends the other day who have a newborn boy, maybe
Yeah.
6 months, and uncircumcised. And it was, I wager it might actually be the first time I've changed a diaper. I mean, I've certainly been around babies, but it just always seems like there's somebody else, handling most of it. And I did not tend in that way.
Yeah.
And I was given no instruction to. So
Yeah.
that's intriguing. So I wonder, and again, there seems to be no real objective reasoning or solid studies. I don't know. I haven't dug that deep, as is my way, and I don't think you've even had much of an opportunity to dig
No,
deep.
I have in a very, and I would say I've dug in a cursory fashion, being only slightly curious about it. And it seems neither harmful in any sort of extended sense, nor beneficial in any extended sense. So it seems
Mhm.
almost like an act of minimal consequence. But it's not an action of no consequence. I think actually it's intended to be an action of profound consequence. There's a
Mm.
story in the Bible, I don't know if you ever heard this one. So this, a daughter of an Israelite is either, it's hard to tell with the language, but she was either seduced by, in a consensual fashion, by a foreign lad, or she was raped. It's honestly not enormously clear. And then, but in order to sort of resolve this, the patriarch says, you can marry my daughter, but first you and all your kin have to be, as we are, circumcised. You essentially have to mark yourself for the tribe. Now, of course, if it was rape, slicing off a piece of the man's penis seems quite appropriate. If it was consensual, this sort of tribal affiliation is, I guess, contextually is an okay ask or whatever. So they all submit to it, like young boys, grown men. And then when they are like lying around holding their junk and groaning. This is obviously paraphrasing the Bible. The patriarch's sons, ones who were like, no, you can't have our sister. Again, whether they're avenging rape or just fighting with her new boyfriend, we don't really know. They come in and kill them all. So they are they're debilitated as adults in this fashion. So I just want to introduce, if anyone didn't know, there's actually like the controversial history of circumcision extends rearward in quite dramatic fashion from time to time. And again, it's meant to be a dramatic surrender for adults.
Yeah. Wow, I actually didn't know much about the origins at all, so I appreciate that. We've talked about a couple of potential benefits: improved sensitization, sexual experiences, potentially, I don't know, better hygiene, or I might say easier hygiene.
Yeah.
One potential benefit is the reduce of sexually transmitted infections, or STIs. That's intriguing. Potentially the lower risk of penile cancer, potentially risk of cervical cancer in female partners, lower risk of infant urinary tract infections. I mean,
that makes sense.
Track just with hygiene, I suppose.
Yep.
Yeah. So any other potential benefits that we can?
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I mean, especially the hygiene thing factors in, especially when you consider the origins. Although I'd be fascinated. Again, I only really know myopically the origins through the Jewish tradition, and then really what people sort of, I think, sometimes spuriously refer to as the Judeo-Christian tradition. Certainly what influenced the United States of America, or even my parents' decisions as like whatever, raised somewhat adjacent to nominal Catholicism. But I don't know how many other cultures around the world do it or don't do it, like for other reasons, for hygienic reasons, perhaps. But it certainly makes sense if you like lived in the wild, as we consider it. But if you lived a semi-nomadic existence in the desert, just because when I go to the beach, I can really finish it there. I don't even need to finish that sentence. When I go to the beach, when I return, sand is a lot of places, in a lot of crevices, and I can't say it's enormously comfortable. So even just having that advantage to be able to move with, I often think about that in the new Quiet Place movie just came out. I don't know if you ever saw the first one or two, but in it, at some point, they have to keep like a baby quiet. Keeping babies quiet in a nomadic, like warring tribes scenario, you would want babies to be as quiet as possible. And a baby irritated by sand, scraping against his urethra because it was entrapped by the foreskin around it. There might be some tactical advantages there.
Well, and you did live in the desert for 40 days, so I wonder.
I did, but I didn't, I didn't have much of a foreskin to modify. I actually sometimes think aesthetically, I find it aesthetically less pleasing. The shy. I always think it's sort of a shy penis, the uncircumcised penis. But again, that's just growing up looking at my own, since I was able to have any sense of myself as a body. However, go ahead.
Well, my sense is too. I will admit I have watched pornography. My sense is it's more common to be circumcised in pornography.
Yeah, it does seem to be. That does, like, I know, I feel like that would mark a specific regionality. I think some of that is just coming from the prevalence of circumcision in the United States, and the United States, that's a whole other question for another day. But the United States being a major maker, manufacturer, marketer, distributor of pornography. I mean, I don't know where it sits in terms of, especially now, like the internet has made like making money on porn a little bit different, but
and yet
I've assumed it's
estimates only 1/3 of men, and I assume that's in America, but I don't know if that's true.
Yeah, but I assume, yeah, at some point there's, I guess you would think there's maybe that false or barely true perception of cleanliness. So then it doesn't seem like it's already, porn was already naughty, but it wasn't like early on, at least, it wasn't like dangerous. You know, you weren't like trying to like give anyone a disease. Listen, I'm sure there's some dark web porn that's all about giving people sexually transmitted diseases. Because again, whoa, oh man. But at least in that sense, it sort of makes sense aesthetically. But the differentiation actually between the sexes, I think, is actually made more pronounced by circumcision, meaning there is both a somewhat shy and somewhat revealed sense, really depending on a woman's genitalia.
Mm,
And then
yeah.
likewise for like a circumcised man, that gives it a similar vibe of like it's partially a partially hidden organ, even though people would say, well, no, it's just actually the whole thing is the organ itself. And you're like, well, sort of. There is still it's just aesthetically what it looks like when you, again, from a very young age, I was engaging with uncircumcised penises. When you pull the foreskin down, there's a sense of reveal, the same way as it when a flower unfolds, you know, flower
Yeah.
unfolds and
Oh,
reveals
that's
the pollen inside. There is a oh, it almost like, oh, there's the real thing. But I know it's not completely accurate, but same thing with the clitoris, right? That if you clitoral hoods vary from, I know, from person to person, but there is a sense of like a pullback to reveal like the organ of pleasure, or in a man's case, like the pleasure organ, which is also like very specifically like the reproductive emitter.
yeah. And my sense generally is that the way a person moves through the world is largely influenced by their genitalia. And you found a
Mm,
piece. There was a woman
mm,
um, had written a piece, maybe on just a series of tweets or something, and she had said something quite similar. And I
mm.
thought that was intriguing to say the least. I want to clarify one thing.
Yep.
Um, it actually seems like this question of improved sexual experiences kind of cuts both ways,
Yeah.
in the sense that one, according to the Google AI summary, which we know must be 100% accurate, uh, circumcision can lead to stronger and more satisfying orgasms and may also increase the interval between sexual encounters. That would seem logical based on desensitization.
Yes.
Um, so yeah, that's I'm holding that as a curiosity. Maybe there's just different advantages or disadvantages based on
Mm.
different aspects of pleasure or sexual experience.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, I feel like especially as circumcision has been divorced from its cultural intention, it becomes, I mean, at some point, it becomes almost nonsensical to me. Because again, I think with all these things, with the advantage, disadvantage, you are probably quibbling about pretty small margins of danger or benefit, like kind of we talked about from the very beginning. So in some ways, I would say, and this is maybe rushing to my conclusion, but even just considering that, they're like, oh, okay, well, sure, there's maybe some benefit of stamina or orgasm peak or whatever, but that varies so much from person to person. And then even from my whatever, anecdotally or actually, I don't know, like from IQ, that ranges across like IQ. Um, I mean, like sexual performance is such a complicated what is it? It's a complicated procedure. It sounds so weird to reduce it to something as procedure, but it really but it is a journey, sure, right? As a pleasure journey. It's so interwoven. So in some ways, I would almost jump to I mean I don't think it's enormously appropriate. I don't think it's inappropriate necessarily. But I think to do it generically, to do it as like a knee jerk thing, to me is inappropriate because it's meant to be sort of a marking towards a manhood. It's an early manhood ritual essentially, right? It's marking male babies in a specific fashion. I think in some ways it's obviously it's built specifically in a patriarchal construct. It's built to like as a marking of my pleasure is less important. My pleasure is less important than God's pleasure. My pleasure is less important than other people's pleasure. So that
Mm.
by the time you grow old, like you have a marking on you. And I would say that makes specifically distinct, that is distinct to me in my cultural context as a circumcised man, as opposed to, this is always where it gets kind of othery, that tribe over there, they tend towards self gratification, hedonism, etc.
Yeah.
But once it's divorced from that context and it's just like, oh, well, we just did it. I'm like, well, that seems weird, man. That's like if you picked up any sort of male marking or female marking ritual from a culture that you're not really part of. Because then you're not really, it is a form of cultural appropriation. Now, of course, you do it long enough and it becomes your culture. That's pretty much how all cultures work. But it does seem like, well, it's a little weird. You don't know the reason behind that. I mean, it's almost like whatever the reason we say bless you when someone sneezes. It's, it's a strange, it's strange that slicing off a piece of a boy's penis goes as culturally unquestioned as, a polite response to sneezing.
To chase the ghosts away. And
Yeah, exactly. You got to keep it. You just opened it up. You just opened up your spiritual passage.
well, I'm ready to call it. Should we circumcise our male babies?
Gosh, I never had a male baby, so now that I'm getting down to it, I'm just like, I never had a male baby, come out of the womb anyway. I used to joke before I had girls that, especially when we started like being open to having children, going goalie free sexually, then I would joke with people when they would bring up circumcision. And I was like, oh, well, yeah, if we have girls, I'm definitely going to circumcise them. I thought that was funny. It rarely got a laugh. It almost never got a laugh to the person I said it directly to. It would often get laughs from people who were listening in. It's a little. It was intended to be disturbing, but it was intended to provoke exactly this sort of questioning. That you're like, well, that's a weird thing to just casually bring up. Now, maybe they meant to have an intense conversation about it, and I, of course, made a joke out of it instead. But should we? In some ways, I would say no, because I would even say culturally, the Messiah has come and the ceremonial law is finished, in which case, even Judaically, then it's kind of a pre-bar mitzvah experience for a boy, where the boy is like bar mitzvah literally means son of the commandment. So if you bar mitzvah a boy, you're literally doing a public ceremony. Now, again, people just do it as a party or quinceanera sort of thing, but you are technically, that's why they read, pieces of the Torah or whatever. You're putting this kid, especially at the age of accountability at that point, on the path of they are now accountable to the commandments of God. Likewise, you're doing so for an infant child. That's real heavy and intense. And I don't know providentially whether that makes sense. I mean, I barely think it's appropriate to like baptize the child. And that's just dipping a kid in water. I'm like, I don't really understand that makes pragmatic sense because I was like, how do you know? Are you trying to force the issue, right? Are you trying to like force God's hand, like make him recognize him? But if you were a Jewish person, meaning if you are of the line of Abraham, going back till whatever, I sort of understand keeping it going, because at this like you feel like we didn't have any specific commandments to stop doing it, so you're like, well, we're just going to keep doing it just in case. So I would say if you are Jewish, I'm going to give you do get a special exception card where I would say yes, it's appropriate. Although you should question it more deeply whether it's required now that the sacrificial system has been done away with. But if you're not Jewish, then I'm just going to go ahead and say no. I don't know why I feel more controversial saying that response more than any other one, but I'm like, yeah, I'm just going to say no.
All right. Well, I'm very grateful to know more about the cultural, origins and meaning, and the idea of humbling oneself for God, if that's an appropriate interpretation.
Yeah.
And my answer would just still be a blanket no.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a no.
Yep. I mean, this is one of the times, Andy, that I wish, or I hope that, our viewership grows enough that people start sending us, we'll have a PO box and people can start sending us foreskins in the mail. Be like, oh yeah, not appropriate? In your face. Tell me what to do.
That's when we know we've made it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't know if this is apocryphal or not, but at some point I remember hearing that there was like a tradition. I gotta look this up after I see if I'm just completely off my rocker, but there was a tradition that some people would like keep the foreskin and then they would like plant it. They would like bury it in the ground and plant a tree. I think that part's sweet.
Well, yeah. I mean, there's some. It's really not. I don't know if this is a reasonable comparison, but some cultures eat the placenta, right?
Yep. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that, to me, seems a little more natural because the placenta comes out on its own.
Yeah. 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 And as functionally is whatever. We may be a higher animal, but we're still animals. It does make sense to just eat anything that's protein rich and useful.
Right?
I popped some as pills. I popped some placenta as pills, but I didn't cook it. I wanted to do it, but we had a whole C-section birth thing, and it was like I couldn't make that decision. I wasn't clear-headed to make that decision to be like, wait, no, how do we preserve it, get it home, cook it with onions?
Mm-hmm.
But I've never eaten a foreskin. Although, you know what? When I eat calamari, kind of similar.
That's gonna change how I and everybody listening eats calamari. But on that note,
Perfect.
love you
I love you as well.
and your lack of foreskin.
Bye.